Hello, Phoenix Collective. Welcome back to Taboo Talks with Krystal, where we dive into those raw, real conversations that so many of us need, but often don't get to have. I'm your host, Krystal Casey, and today we're talking about something that hits close to home for so many of us: relationships, healing, and the power of inner transformation. Our guest today is Tammy Cox, a transformational coach whose story is a powerful reminder that healing your marriage often begins with healing yourself. Tammy has helped countless women step into their power and make meaningful changes in their relationships by first addressing their own wounds, their own patterns, and their own mindsets. If you've ever felt stuck, unheard, or unfulfilled in your relationship, this episode is for you. Tammy's journey from struggle to empowerment is proof that real change starts from within. I know her insights will inspire and uplift you as we close out this year and look ahead to what's possible in 2025. Let's jump in. Tammy, thank you so much for joining us today. Your mission and your story is so inspiring. And I know I can relate, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners can too. So I'm eager to hear your perspective. You've been really open about your own marriage struggles and how healing your inner child transformed your relationship. Can you share a bit about your story and how it led to the work that you're doing now?
So I was 26 when I had my first daughter, and I had gotten married not too long before, I think 8 months we were pregnant with her before we got married. Shh, don't tell anyone. But when I had my first daughter, all of my triggers started alarming. All of this angst within me started to bubble to the surface. And really what it was all my unhealed trauma and wounding that I thought was in the past, right? As I used air quotes, I thought it was totally behind me, right? Out of sight, out of mind. I had no idea that they were even there, really, the wounds. And so at that moment, I really got to the place where I just really couldn't function. I was so triggered by everything, just looking at my perfect little baby and thinking, oh, I don't want to fuck her up the way I was fucked up. Like I did. You know what it's like when you hold that baby in your hands and they're so perfect and so beautiful. I just had all of my childhood just kind of came to the surface at that moment. And so I just really wasn't okay. I tried so many different things to try and heal myself. The therapies, the books, the retreats. I mean, I did it all. And it really wasn't until I started doing the deep inner work of healing my trauma wounds before I started to really shift and transform and started to quiet my nervous system, which was just a wreck. That's the gist of it.
You talk about working on your own inner wounds, and specifically what I read in your pre-interview form was working on yourself in order to improve your marriage. And that really hit for me because I feel like that was the pivot point for me. There was a point in my marriage where I realized that I couldn't fix him. I couldn't make him want to go to therapy. I couldn't make him want to talk about things. I couldn't make him want to work on himself. So I shifted and started working on myself. Now, I had a very different outcome than you, but can you talk about why you take this approach and how it can lead to change in your marriage?
So my husband and I, we had a really rocky marriage for, I'd say, most of our marriage. We've been together 18 years now with those unhealed wounds, because as I said, we both had lots of trauma from our childhood. And of course, we all attract our very polar opposite, right? So the way he triggers and the way I trigger and how we respond to the triggers were just opposite. And then, yes, they sort of fed into this cycle. Early on in my journey, I really had to get to the place where I was just, and I believe we all do, where we get to this place where we've suffered so much. We get to the end of it and we're just I have to change this. For me, it was, I had gone through cycles of like super dark depression where I was like suicidal. And the deepest, darkest one, I got to this place where I was like, I can't live like this. I can't live with this pain anymore. I either have to heal myself or I'm taking myself out. I made the decision in that moment, but I'd love to tell you that my journey was like quick, but it wasn't. That was just like, it was a long journey. In marriage, I know it's so common for us to be like, they're the problem. Every one of my clients has that when they first come in. I had that when I first embarked on my healing journey. Oh, it's my parents. It's them. It's that circumstance. It's this. And, we're pointing to everything else but the common denominator. And what I tell my clients is, listen, you're valid in the way that you feel. However, you can't change them. You can only change you. So we're going to just pretend like we're blind for about 12 weeks. We're going to absolutely stop looking outward and we're going to go deep within you. We're going to fix you. And see, the thing is when I say fixed, that's the wrong word. When I started to heal myself, my husband started to change. Why? Because he didn't have the same wife. When I transformed me, he literally didn't have the same, fight buddy. I didn't show up for that, right? So when you change yourself, you're changing every single one of your relationships. And as long as you're looking and blaming everyone else outside of you, you're always going to have that victim mentality versus I'm owning all of it. I'm taking it all on. Everything in my life is because I created it. And I believe we have to get to that place if we want 100% autonomy, which is full ownership of our life. If we want any result that we haven't yet got, we have to own all of it, all the shit, all the great stuff, everything.
100%. 100%. What is one myth that you would like to break for anyone who's listening right now?
Oh, that you need your spouse on board to save your marriage. You absolutely don't. And kind of just like what I said before is like, when you change, every relationship changes because you're not the same person. You're not going to attract the same person from your spouse. For instance, like for me, as more of the controller in my relationship, that was like my trigger response where I'd kind of, I'd turn into like a little tantrum toddler when my husband would trigger me. And once I healed that side to me, all of a sudden that little toddler's tantrums started to disappear or get much smaller or much more time in between. I wasn't as sensitive, right? And so that softened him. I finally became a soft and safe place for him to land to where he could start to let go of his issues, right? And so it just takes one person to start the cycle, because if you look at a marriage, no two people are on the same page at the same time. It's almost impossible. Like when I look back at my marriage, there was times where I was like massively growing and he was like back there. And there were times where he was massively growing and I was back there. We weren't always
right.
But you don't need to be, right? If you need your spouse to be X, Y, Z in order for you to be happy, then again, you're the victim because you need that person to treat you a certain way or be a certain way. That's just codependency, right? When I mean you start to own your life, it's like you get to say, like, it's not that my husband doesn't get in bad moods or I don't get in bad moods. It's just I don't blame him for it. I say, okay, you're in a bad mood. That's fine. I have mine every once in a while. Take your space. I'll go in the other room. I don't make it about me. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Versus if you're still in that victim place, if you haven't really started on your healing journey, you just have the blame game. Everything is everyone else's fault. So that's why I say you really got to get to that place where you own it all, or else it just will continue. Your life will continuously be in other people's hands.
So true. So can you tell me, Tammy, how do you help someone begin to work through that? How do you help someone begin to take those steps?
Well, the first pillar in my program is really the healing of the self. It's healing the childhood wounds. So knowing that everything you are today goes back to the first 5 years of your life. We got to go back in there and we got to find those patterns and we got to heal up the wounds. The first pillar is really neutralizing the trauma and finding the beliefs stored within the trauma. We call them life commands. We find those, all the I ams, all the beliefs about ourselves that are limiting us, that are holding us back from what we really want. And then once we do that, the next pillar is really creating the new identity, because when we look at the identity that was created in the first 5 years, we weren't really doing it on purpose. Mm-hmm. And so we created a whole bunch of shit we didn't want. So the second pillar is really creating the new identity. Who do you choose to be now? What do you want to be now? How would you like to show up in the world? And then from there, we get to recreate your whole life experience, right? We get to look at what are the things that aren't working and how do we get to pivot? How do we get to change those? How do you get in full ownership, full responsibility of your life? And then the fourth pillar is really where you get to recreate what your marriage looks like. So for instance, the whole goal is for the husband and wife to get on the same level as much as possible. We know it's not going to be 100%, but if she is more of the controller, which is me, and he's more of the supporter, I have to come down here, right? Or he's got to rise up, one of the two. I attract more supporter females, so she tends to have a controller husband. So the controller up here, she's down here, meaning she's been so passive in life, gave away her power constantly to him. It's up to me to give her the tools to empower herself to rise up to match that energy, right? That will in turn bring him down. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes men don't want to. Sometimes the dysfunction, I've had some women come in that just, the dysfunction was so bad to where he had complete and supreme control over her because she gave it to him. And she doesn't necessarily want to take it back. So you'll see the mismatch, right? With people, that's where you see really unhealthy relationships and even abuse.
So that just has me thinking, because like you, I'm probably more the controller. And what I heard when you said that was that I need to bring myself down.
Down in the controlling way.
Gotcha.
Do you know what I'm saying? For me, it was like I had to examine when I was nitpicking him, when I was demeaning him in these sly little tiny ways. That's what I mean by coming down. I don't mean by making myself absolutely unimportant. I mean, I have to look at my behavior and say, what am I doing to kind of pull him down because I have to be up here? And we all have our different traits, right? But for me, it was just nitpicking and, being super critical.
I'm not overtly controlling, right? But I'm definitely like a controller. And I know that about myself. So that brought a lot of clarity. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. And the thing too is we don't get to judge that, because who you are today is because it's the personality you had to create in your first 5 years, because that's how you survived your family of origin. So for me, I grew up in a very violent family. There was abuse. There was violence every day. There was a violence every day in my house. And so I thought that was normal. The only way I survived is by being the biggest and baddest, right? I had to be violent in order to survive it. So you get to have compassion. This goes back to the first pillar, to healing that little girl within us, because that little girl is still in there. She still has all the pain she felt. And it is up to us to parent her, to nurture her, to love her, and not to judge her. So when we have our tantrums and we get triggered, we get to be so compassionate with those little tiny girls within us, because they're in pain.
So true.
And your spouse is in pain too. It just looks different.
Absolutely. I feel like over the course of my marriage, I had been doing a lot of inner child work, because I knew I came from a dysfunctional home. That was a big focus for me growing up. And then when tragedy struck again, it was kind of like, sometimes I feel like it undid all of the healing. Sometimes I feel like it compounded it, but it definitely has resurfaced in different ways. And the 4 pillars that you're talking about going through, I can see in myself, even not looking back at the first 5 years, but perhaps the first 5 years of my marriage. So Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
The last question that I always ask everybody before we close is one of my favorite sayings is, I never lose, I win, or I learn. So if you could share with us, what do you think your biggest failure in your journey so far has been? And what have you learned from it that you would like to pass along to our listeners?
I don't believe in failure actually, but I get the drift of your question. So I'd say starting my healing journey earlier before I really messed up my kids. I say messed up my kids, but not really. The unhealed version of me, now they have this mom versus the one before. And we talk about it a lot. But, I really, when I get the young women come to me and they don't have any kids yet, I'm just like, oh, this is such a gift for you. I'm so glad you're giving yourself this gift so young before you have kids, because they're going to get a better mom because you chose to heal. And the truth is, my kids got a gift too, because they watched me heal. They got all the effects of it. So there's no right or wrong. That's just me nitpicking and judging myself. And I don't like it when my clients do it. So I really work on not doing that to myself, because we don't know what we don't know. That's the truth of it. And we have to give ourselves credit. Like what you said, Krystal, is like you felt like you went backwards. And I believe that we are going to have times where it feels like that on our journey. But the truth is once we head on our journey to heal, I don't believe that there's any going back. I believe that we can, sometimes it can get overwhelming and we just want to bury our head in the sand, but we're actually really still growing, even if we don't feel it. Like you already made the decision. And don't beat yourself up if the marriage didn't work. Like if my marriage didn't work out and I had a different story, like it would still be the gift. I still believe trauma is a gift. I believe in the healing process is also a gift. Like it just all is good. Even if I got this, post-divorce and I'm telling you the story, it's like still all good. And my journey and your journey are different, just like everyone else's. And I don't believe that it's right, wrong, good, or bad. I think those are just the beliefs that were installed in us when we were younger. And I had the same thing. Like you get married, you carry that out till the end. But the truth is like at any point, if my relationship with my husband is no longer serving me, it's ending. It doesn't have to be terrible. But if it's not serving, it's time to say goodbye with so much love.
Oh, I know somebody needed to hear that.
Yeah. So if we send everyone away with love, knowing everyone that came in is a gift, and no one's going to stick around in the same way, because life is constantly changing. It'll never stay the same. That's a given. And then we're out of this meat suit and on to the next. So let's not take this life too seriously. Let's try and have some fun here and enjoy this experience, because we came here for the growth. We came here for the fun. We came here for the expansion, and we just don't need to take it all that seriously.
Before we close out, is there any final thoughts or anything else that you would like to add that we haven't covered yet?
I would like to talk about my podcast, because we are looking for some people to come on there. What I'm actually doing is very different, because it's not an interview. It's actually people that need a transformation, right? They've had some sort of experience with love. Some people divorced, some went through domestic violence, some just haven't been able to find love, you name it. And they come on and I take them through a process, and it's completely anonymous. It's called Behind the Veil, and they are covered, their face is covered, and I get to take them through a transformation right there on the call. And it's so beautiful, because it's a give to those that watch. It's a give to the woman that comes on. And it's obviously a give to me, because I get to transform with everyone I take through a session. So I would love to just say, hey, if there's anyone out there who has had, some really terrible experiences in love, I will say all of that goes back to childhood trauma, and all that is fixable. There's nothing you cannot change about yourself or your life. It is all malleable. It's all in your hands to the degree that you know it is.
I love that. How can people connect with you if they're interested in being behind the veil?
I can set you up with my link tree where they can sign up on there. in the show notes. That'd be perfect. But yeah, it really has all of my platforms. I'd say Instagram is probably my biggest platform right now, but you can find me on all the socials, and I have a lot of free content and material also on my link tree. And yeah, reach out.
Thank you, Tammy, so much for sharing your story and your insights. It was really good getting to speak with you today.
Yes, Krystal, thank you for having me.